Good afternoon, everybody, or good day. Uh, my name is Alon, and I'm going to be talking about the topic of preserving integrity in online social networks. This is a topic that has gotten a lot of attention recently and is obviously a very sensitive topic for society at large. I'm going to be giving you some highlights of the topic and of the solutions that people have developed for this. If you want more details, there is a survey that will hopefully come out before this talk is actually aired at KDD, and it's with several of my colleagues at Facebook. So first of all, let's define the problem. So we all know that social networks are intended to be a force for good. They bring people together. They enable everybody to have a voice, whether they're somebody famous or your next door neighbor. They enable you to connect with people that are close to you, but also people who may share interests and are far away from you, and still can provide some value to your life. The problem is, like every technology, it's a double-edged sword. And because so many people can have voice, the social network also reflects some of the worst behaviors in humanity, behaviors that we've seen before social networks, but because of the network itself and the ability to amplify these behaviors, these problems are becoming much more significant. So these things are the well-known examples of hate speech, misinformation. People try to sell various items on the network and to provide graphic violence and stuff like that. So integrity is the field of trying to minimize or eliminate the number of times that people are exposed to content that is violating the rules. So when I say the rules, every company, every social media company will actually post policies for what content is allowed on the network and what isn't. And these policies, setting these policies is actually a pretty complicated endeavor in itself. So once the policies are there, and these policies are changing all the time as well, the companies will set up systems and pipelines for enforcing these policies on the content. Now, because of the amount of content that we have, the enforcement is actually a very hard technical problem. So what are the challenges to integrity? First of all, it's the amount of content. You have billions of posts being shared every day. These posts are coming in hundreds of languages. They're coming from everywhere around the world, which means that there are cultural nuances that you need to understand in order to be able to tell whether something is actually meant to be hate speech or demeaning to somebody. And there are many types of violations. I'll give you an example. I'll give you a partial list soon, but think of the fact that there are tens of different ways that people abuse the network. So in addition to all of these problems, the other thing that complicates it is that it's adversarial. So you might come up with a solution, say, for finding ads that people try to sell illegal drugs, and you take those off. A week later, these drug-selling organizations will come up with a way to go through your defenses. So, and then you need to develop more and more sophisticated algorithms. So you're all the time, it's sort of an arms race. You all the time need to be up to speed with the latest ways of circumventing your defenses. As a result of these challenges, artificial intelligence is a major and necessary part of the solution. There's no way that you can have enough humans that will look at every post and every violation that comes up and make a sound judgment whether to leave it on the network or not. So AI is a significant part of the solution, and this talk is about what kind of AI solutions have been applied and what are the challenges that still are there. Now, there's another challenge, which is inherently it's about you can police the network very strictly. But then you're going to be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which is the whole idea of having a social network is giving people a voice to express whatever reasonable ideas that they have. So if you police it too much, you're actually not giving the people a voice. So there's a very subtle balance between keeping the place safe and giving people a voice. Again, not something that is new in society in general, but something that, because of the network effect, is much harder here. So integrity involves different kinds of objects. So you can have violations that have to do with fake accounts or accounts of organizations that are not supposed to be there. A lot of the violations have to do with actual posts that people post on the network. Some of the violations can happen in response to the post and the comments that people respond with. There are violations that happen in messaging, like trying to solicit children to do certain activities. And obviously, ads are also not immune to violations. We're not going to cover all this in all of these kinds of violations in the talk today. I'm mostly going to focus on violations that we see on posts on social media. So again, this is a huge field, and it would take me hours to go into all the details of all the solutions that people have developed. So I'm going to give you sort of the main trends that are going on in the field right now, and some of the directions that we need to look at. Now, integrity is a very, very sensitive topic to speak about, especially when you're coming from Facebook. It is sometimes assumed that if I talk about something, then that's also an endorsement from Facebook about a particular technique or solution. So it's not. What I'm giving you is the science, and if I give you an example that is taken from Facebook or show you something that is done in Facebook, I will say so explicitly. So don't assume anything that I don't explicitly say on that account. So with that in mind, what we're going to do is I'm going to first spend some time defining the problem, and the purpose of that is to illustrate, hopefully clearly, that this is a really, really hard problem to even define. Not only what the policies are, how to enforce it, but also how to measure progress. Then what I'll do is I'll give you a framework. I will identify the main areas in which we can address the integrity problem, or develop technology to address the integrity problem. And those problem areas should be applicable to many kinds of violations. Finally, hopefully most of the talk will be, I'll be talking about some of the solutions and some of the open problems that we see in the field today. Okay, so let me start with community policies. So this you can go and see. You can Google community policies or community standards of Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Any social network will post these things. So what you're seeing in this slide is summarized from the Facebook community standards, and I pictured it in a way to illustrate the challenges. So in the second column, there are things that you're not supposed to do. The third column is content that is very closely related, but is okay. So let me take an example. So you're not supposed to have a presence on Facebook if you have a violent mission. So if you're advocating terrorism or organized hate or mass murder, you should not have a presence on Facebook. You can't support individuals who, you're not supposed to show support for individuals who espouse these ideas, and you're not supposed to incite violence or to admit to carrying out violent activities on the social network. That all makes sense, but let's go to the area of guns for a moment. You can actually, or sorry, explosives. You can actually discuss on Facebook how to create and use explosives, okay, if there's a clear context that is not for violent purposes. Okay, for example, if it's a commercial video game or some clear scientific or educational purpose. In that case, you're allowed to discuss how to make explosives. If you're going to talk about making explosives to actually harm people, that's not allowed. Now, the point here is to show that it's very nuanced, okay? Even for humans, this can be very nuanced. So think ahead to an AI system that is supposed to figure out whether you're actually trying to incite violence or whether you're trying to teach kids how to do some chemistry. That's going to be a difficult problem. As another example, you're not supposed to sell firearms or illegal drugs on Facebook in this case, but you can debate the crimes and the laws governing the sale of these merchandise. So you can talk about the fact that you think that guns should be allowed to be sold everywhere, or not allowed to be sold everywhere, but you can't actually sell guns. Again, that nuance is, we're going to have to develop AI systems that understand these nuances. Now, sometimes the problem comes from the fact that it's the tone of a post that can actually illustrate the intent of what is actually being said and whether that intent is being harmful. So an example of that is that sometimes there are words that I'm not going to say in this talk that are used to degrade certain populations of people. Okay, now it has been the case that these populations have sometimes adopted these words as a way of relating to each other in a friendly and way that helps them connect. So they actually might make posts that use these banned words, but the purpose, the intent that they're doing this is not in order to demean anybody. It's just to connect with people from their own subgroup. Okay, so this is again a subtlety that we're going to have to pay attention to. Another point is it's very hard to set absolute rules. Okay, so we can all agree that posting nude photos of children is not allowed. In fact, that's part of the policy. But this photo here on the slide of the 9-year-old naked girl running from the bombing in Vietnam in 1973, I think, is a photo that won a Pulitzer Prize, and it has become part of our culture. And so posting a photo like this actually seems like a reasonable exception to what would otherwise seem like an obvious rule. There are tens of types of violations. Okay, and you might ask, where did we get this list? Well, we didn't get a list. We saw people, or social networks saw people violate or use the network in ways that we thought are violating, and then we encoded that in the community standards. So these things start from accounts that are abusive and people trying to phish stuff and get your private information or use it for financial scams. There are regulated goods, as we saw. There's things having to do with sexual exploitation or solicitation for adults or for kids, human trafficking, trying to get people from one place to another in order to for them to serve some other role somewhere else. And as I already talked about, things like encouraging suicide or self-injury, inciting societal harm or personal harm, like drink Clorox in order to, cure COVID. And then there are the ones that are most that occur very often, which is hate speech and misinformation. So the point is here, there's a wide variety of types of violations that we see. Let's talk for a moment about the enforcement. Okay, so when posts come in, two things happen. One is they get fed to an AI system that tries to figure out whether the post violates one of the policies. Another thing that happens is that users see posts and they report them as violated. Now, in some cases, the AI system will be extremely confident and will remove the extremely confident in its prediction and will remove the content right away. In other cases, the content goes to verification by humans. Now, there are two different pipelines here. For most of the violations, these posts go to people who are trained with the policy rules, and they look at these posts and decide whether they're violating or not. For posts that have to do with misinformation, in other words, here we're saying somebody is stating a fact about the world, that may or may not be true. In this case, the social network is not in the business of determining what is true and what is false in the world. So here, what the social network will do is it will work with certified third-party fact checkers from the full range of political spectrum. And these people need to be certified by various certification bodies. And these people will these fact checkers will make the determination and then return the result to, will feed the result to the social network to decide whether to enforce a violation or not. There's also a chance to appeal any decision that is made by the social network. Enforcement means an account might be removed, content is removed. It might be, you might actually call law enforcement in order to go and check some situation, or it could also be that the content is demoted so much in the stream that people are unlikely to see it. For 1 minute, I want to take a slightly broader view of enforcement. So what I've talked about so far is identifying content that clearly violates the rules and removing it from the network altogether. Okay, but we can take a broader look. One is, instead of removing it, and especially when you're talking about content that is possibly borderline, you may want to consider downranking the content and the stream. So if you downrank, in other words, it takes longer for you to get to that content when you're scrolling through your stream on social media. If you downrank a piece of content, then the number of people who are going to see it obviously is going to be much smaller, and you've mitigated some harm. Another angle to look at is to say, the decision of whether something is harmful take something like hate speech, could be very personal, right? So something might be harmful to a Jew, and may not be harmful, hateful to someone else. So maybe the decision of downranking shouldn't be done for everybody altogether. Maybe it should be done on a personal basis. Now, obviously, you can see that that's going to introduce many problems in itself, but that's certainly a set of questions that can be asked. Finally, if you think about the goal of the social network, right, you're coming and you're viewing a bunch of content. Essentially, what you want to do is you want to maximize the number of posts that you see that are that give you a positive experience, that give you some valuable information or make you feel connected to your friends or inspired in some way. So what you want to do is you want to look holistically at all the posts that are on your newsfeed and decide and maximize the number of good experiences and minimize the number of bad experiences that you have. And violations of community standards are a form of bad experiences, and you want to minimize those. Okay, so that's just when we think about enforcement, we can actually think much more broadly. 1 minute about measuring success. Okay, this is really complicated. So ideally, what you want to do is you want to find the percent of violating posts that a system identifies, right? So you know whether you're actually making a dent in the problem. The problem is this is like web search, right? You don't have the whole universe of violating content, and then you can check whether your system found a certain percent of it or not. So the way to do this is you have to sample a relatively small sample of posts, and within that sample, you need to check whether your system found what percent of violations your system found, and what percent of what you found is not actually violations. Now, so it gets more complicated. One is, first of all, not every post is viewed the same number of times. So you actually want to count for the number of times that a post was seen, or the number of times that a post can be seen, right? So what you want to do is you want to essentially count the prevalence of bad experiences. In other words, the number of times that people saw bad content on your network. But even then, not all violations are of the same severity, right? Some things are more hateful than others. Some nudity is a little more blatant than others. So you would actually want to, again, weigh the more severe violations. But this is an even harder problem, because now you need a way of assigning a severity for every violation, which is obviously a hard problem in itself. There's also another thing to keep in mind, is that fluctuations in prevalence are sort of a norm. That happens all the time. So for example, you might remove something today, and two things might happen. One is maybe the person who posted this, made this post, actually didn't intend to violate the policy. So maybe, and this happens a lot. Not all violations are intentional. A lot of people just don't know the rules, and they post language that shouldn't be posted. So if you alert people to the fact that certain things have been taken down, you will cause these good people to actually follow the rules, and so now the number of violations you see is going to be smaller, or the ones that your system can identify will be smaller, because less violations are being posted that your system knows how to identify. The other thing that might happen is that the bad actors will find ways to circumvent your defenses, and will now find ways that your classifier cannot identify. Okay, so what the net result of these two things is that tomorrow you actually might see an increase in prevalence, even though yesterday you did something good. So that's part of the game here. There are a bunch of other measurements that people consider. Facebook actually publishes a report on these every 6 months, and so you can go there and see more details. Okay, let me just talk about this framework really quickly about what are the things that you can look at when you're doing integrity violations. So when you're trying to find integrity violations. So over time, companies have typically developed individual teams in order to deal with each violation in isolation. That's obviously not scalable for the long run, even though some of the violations require, violation types require specific kinds of techniques that may not be applicable elsewhere. But what we want to do here is sort of look holistically at the entire field of integrity and figure out what are the levers, what are the key technical areas that you can start doing, or that people have done research on, to that together might, you can take these techniques and put them together in innovative ways in order to address a particular kind of violation. So what I did here was I divided the world into what the things that happen before the post is made, the things that you can look at that are on the post itself, and the things that you can look at after the post has been made. Okay, so before the post, right, you actually have the real world events that are going on that might have been the cause for somebody to post something on the network. Maybe you're sitting on a beach and relaxing, unlikely to be a violation, or you're attending some sort of demonstration and things are getting violent, and people are starting to talk in language that wouldn't be appropriate on the social network. So that's understanding the real world event is actually an area that hasn't been done enough yet. The other thing you can do is you can start understanding the profiles of the users in the organizations that are the actors on your network. So sometimes there are people or organizations that are prone to certain kind of behaviors, and you want to make sure that that kind of knowledge is available to the model that predicts whether something is a violation or not. You also want to be on the lookout for coordinated activities between different actors. This is actually a really, really important point, because there are some violations, or there are some cases where a bunch of people get together, or a bunch of actors, some of them are simulated, in order to promote certain content to make sure that it's visible and say more misinformation, a piece of misinformation spreads more widely. Obviously, media manipulation is an area that is getting attention right now because it's potential to misrepresent people quite a bit. On the post itself, there's the content analysis. There's the language that is being used, there's the image or the videos, there's the speech or the audio if it exists, and trying to relate what is said in the post to some external evidence that we might have. I'll talk about this in a moment. And finally, you have the reactions to the post that happen after the post is made. And here you can get a lot of signal from the way people react in comments, on whether they're spreading the post very quickly, whether they're, what emojis they're using in response. And so here, the main techniques that are used are some sort of graph analysis or graph deep learning on graphs that are trying to identify certain patterns in behavior. Let me talk about solutions very quickly here, but I'll actually focus more on the open problems. So this probably goes without saying. Natural language understanding techniques have really made a lot of progress in the last few years and are really critical to understanding what people are talking about in a particular post. So in particular, pre-trained representations that are able to understand context much better than previous techniques, and multilingual translation systems that are able to actually do some transfer learning from one language to another, which means that in languages with low resources, such as Burmese, you can actually get some reasonable translation that was not possible before. So these are great advances in NLP, and they continue to boost our capability to identify violating posts. There's an emerging area, which is the style of the text. And here the observation is, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. So when you speak, sometimes you'll have a very positive valence. You'll speak of something very positively or negatively. And the words that you use might show a heightened or not level of arousal. So some of these combinations of valence and arousal correspond to certain emotions that people making the post might have or trying to convey, like being excited or depressed or angry. And there's some initial research in trying to understand whether the affect of a particular post is indicative or could be used as a signal to understanding whether something is abusive or is fake news. And there's actually some indications, some papers that I cited here, that show that there is the style of text is actually very informative to figuring out whether a post is violating in specific ways. There's another thing that you can do, which is incorporating external knowledge. Okay, so there are different versions of this. One is, you see a post, right, and maybe there's an identical post, an almost identical post that you've seen before and that you know is violated. So you don't have to think too much about it. You can remove it right away. But sometimes the changes are such that they're subtle, but they actually might make a big difference. And so this is an active area of research. Another thing that you can do is you can look at a post, and here I'm talking mostly about misinformation, is you can try to extract from the text a particular claim that is being made. Drink Clorox, or Clorox will protect you from COVID, okay? And then you want to take that claim and go to a database of claims that you know are either true or false, and therefore be able to classify whether this post is misinformation or not. The problem with that, and I think the research on this is going to actually evolve quite a bit in the next couple of years. The matching complicated claims is actually very tricky. So it actually, the NLP that is needed is a little ahead of what we have right now, at least a little ahead. Finally, you can actually say there's a lot of knowledge about the world, not only about society and conflicts that are going on in the world, but also news events that have just happened. So obviously, for example, a news event might trigger certain behaviors that are violent. But if you're not aware of the news event, you may not be able to put certain posts in the context of that event, and therefore determine that they're possibly inciting violence. So, and that area is still a complete greenfield. How do we actually represent the world in such a way, or represent the important aspects about the world that enable us to address integrity more effectively? Computer vision is obviously very important to detecting violations, and this figure, what it shows you is one of these is broccoli and one of these is marijuana, and the point is that most of you, or around half of you will not be able to tell which one is which. And so vision can actually be sometimes better than the human eye. In this case, the picture on the left is broccoli or fried broccoli, and the picture on the right is marijuana. So vision has made a lot of progress in being able to actually tell very subtle differences between violating and non-violating content. But the success, the recent progress in NLP and vision brings up a really fascinating area, which is multimodal reasoning. So if you look at this example, if you look at the text, everyone in your ethnic group belongs here. That is completely benign. If you look at the image, it's an image of a cemetery. That's also completely benign. It's when you put those two together that you get what would be entailed here as hate speech towards this particular ethnic group. Okay, so how do we develop systems that can actually understand the connection between the images and the text in order to get the conclusions that you want? So there's a lot of progress in this field. Models that either fuse multiple modalities sort of late in the process, or things that are called early fusion, where you try to build a model that is actually aware of text and images at the same time. And it's a fascinating field. And in fact, one of the systems that we have running at Facebook called Whole Post Integrity Embeddings is based on a multimodal classifier. So what they do is they actually have examples of many kinds of violations. So there's also a lot of transfer learning going on between different kinds of violations. And what they do is they, based on the multimodal model, they produce an embedding, which is a representation of a particular post. Now that embedding is designed in such a way that two posts that are likely to be close to, that are likely to violate in the same way, or not violate in the same way, are going to be close to each other in that vector space. So that embedding is then taken to other downstream classifiers that are trying to predict specific violations like hate speech or misinformation. And that turned out to be an incredibly powerful signal for our classifiers. There's something really interesting with multimodal, which is even though you're taking the image and the text together, there's sometimes, it turns out that what's really giving you the insight is some external information. So for example, take the one here on the left, which is, love the way you smell today. And there's a picture of a skunk. Now, and this is not hate speech, this is just nasty, okay? The point is that there is information about skunks that we bring from our common sense knowledge base, and we put that together with the image and the text to say that this thing is nasty. But in coding that, it might be very challenging for a multimodal model to know that, because nowhere do we know that skunks stink, okay? That's not anywhere in the input. And so the question is whether we're going to need to bring in external sources of knowledge in order to understand multimodal content, and that's a challenge that several groups are looking into right now. There's also, I want to point out, the hateful memes data set, which was created by Facebook just recently to help foster research on multimodal reasoning. So behavioral signals, I'm not going to go into this at all in detail here, but here's an example of somebody who is saying, so this is an example of suicide attempt, okay? So here's someone who's saying, I have so much homework, I want to kill myself, okay? So they're talking about killing themselves, but you can see from the reactions to the post, so that the text itself doesn't actually help you enough to figure out whether it's the person is trying to really kill themselves or not. But it's the reactions to the post, like I feel you, or hang in there, only 3 more days, that actually shows you that this is a benign use of the phrase kill myself. On the other hand, there's an example, this example doesn't even talk about suicide, it just talks about how the person is depressed. But the reactions to this post show that this person might actually be in danger of committing suicide. There's a paper at KDD called TIEs, Temporal Interaction Embeddings for Enhancing Social Media Integrity at Facebook, which I encourage you to read. It actually talks about how Facebook takes into consideration the reactions that people have to a post. In conclusion, so we're preserving integrity is a huge challenge, and obviously it's critical to social networks and by extension to society. And it's wonderful to see how, from a technology point of view, how this problem has pushed the state of the art of AI forward on so many fronts. There are many other challenges that I've not had time to talk about today, like preserving privacy and protecting the human workforce that is actually looking at these posts. And I just want to end with hopefully an inspiring remark, which is AI is being used now in order to address one of the most important societal problems that we have. The question is, are there other societal problems that also need attention, and they too can benefit from some great AI minds that can put their head towards those problems? I think the answer is yes. I'll leave it up to you guys to figure out the details. Thank you very much. Bye.